Hello and welcome to IDDTalks here at AD University. I welcome you at a very important event, the conference titled The Role of Universities in Green Energy and Sustainability, taking place here at the university on December 2nd and 3rd. Now I am honored to be joined by a very distinguished expert, Mr. Serhat Süha Çubukçuoğlu, Senior Fellow, Director of Türkiye Program, Trans Research and Advisory, United Arab Emirates. Warm welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. We are honored to have you in our program again. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. So how do you see the evolving role of the Middle East in global climate transition, exporter of energy security, or driver of renewable innovations?
That's a very interesting question because, as you know, the Middle East had been widely known as the home of hydrocarbon fuels, which are still there to be, for some time to come, perhaps till about 2050s or 60s. But that's not anymore the core of energy business. I would say the future is in renewables, it's in electricity, it's in sustainability, and the Middle Eastern countries, especially, let's say, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries like the United Arab Emirates, have taken enormous steps and bold steps in transitioning their energy infrastructure and preparing for the post-oil economy era by investing in green energy, in clean energy, let's say. That includes the nuclear energy component in the wider energy mix, not just in the country, but across the wider Middle East and the Eurasia region, let's say. That also extends into the Mediterranean, to countries like Turkey, or to the Caucasus, to Azerbaijan and Central Asia like Kyrgyzstan. For instance, in the UAE, to give an example of a country where I live in, Masdar is the state-owned clean energy company that invests heavily in abroad, into solar power plants, into wind farms, both onshore and offshore. Yes, exactly. With SOCAR, they have a major partnership with SOCAR here, and so that's a showcase of how Middle Eastern countries are rebranding themselves as pioneers of energy transition and clean energy for the future. So that plays into, of course, as I mentioned, the theme of nation branding as well. So instead of being labeled as a hydrocarbon economy, that enables you to then position yourself at the intersection of clean energy investments, trade routes, goods and talent and technology that's associated with it. Not just the brick and mortar and the traditional infrastructures of oil business, but developing and future promising technologies like AI, like data science, that goes along with energy transition.
Well, you partially already answered my next question about cooperation between three countries, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, where do you live now, and Azerbaijan. Three countries align most effectively on green transformation. But where exactly? Hydrogen, let's say, smart grids, or R&D investment?
Very good question. So let's start with the basics. COP28 took place in Dubai, UAE. COP29 took place here in Baku, Azerbaijan. And COP31 will be in Antalya in Turkey. So what a nice coincidence that COP30 was in Belém.
COP29 was in Belém. COP29 was in Baku, COP30 was
in Belém. COP31 will be in Antalya in Turkey, yes, next year.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But we'll be co-hosting it with Australia. So they will manage the negotiations part, and Turkey will host the event and make the general arrangements for the gatherings. But the points you touched are extremely important because R&D, smart grids, green transition that involves cross-border, grid interconnectivity. Although when you look at these three countries, they are physically far apart. That doesn't preclude them from, mutual investments into each other's opportunities, into wide offshore and onshore wind farms, solar farms, Trans-Caspian electricity link that connects, the western and eastern coasts of the Caspian Sea, from Kazakhstan to Azerbaijan and onward, which actually is a major route for diversification for European countries, if you look at it that way, also via Turkey and via the Black Sea under the sea electric interconnection from Georgia to Bulgaria. That's another opportunity. It's awaiting future evaluation and implementation. In terms of exchange of know-how, expertise, and technical equipment, I think, for instance, the UAE has made more leap forward in terms of nuclear energy, which Turkey is still in the business of implementing it in Mersin Akkuyu through Russia's Rosatom. It will be an interesting case to see how they collaborate and exchange know-how potentially in the future when that goes live. With Azerbaijan, it's even more interesting because Azerbaijan sits at the center of both energy and trade corridors. Right. So wind, solar, and also biofuel. And if we also maybe think of recycling and circular business, as was discussed in today's session, for instance, how to enable circular economy, which if you look at, for instance, in Europe, Nordic countries are probably the best example of that. In Sweden, in Norway, they have case studies on major electrification, circular economy, companies, households, the government, all feeding into this ecosystem. So we can also take lessons from there and maybe aim to achieve net carbon zero emissions before our set deadlines or declared deadlines of, let's say, 2035, 45, 2053, and so on. Nevertheless, our countries, Turkey, UAE, and Azerbaijan, are not the largest contributors of today's greenhouse gas emissions. So we still have a bit more leeway in terms of the responsibility to act and align ourselves with the global vision to reduce carbon emissions. We are not the biggest emitters in that sense. But still, it's never too early to act as drivers of regional leadership in this, which we are, by the way. And so many countries are actually following our example in that regard. A traditional energy partnership case between Turkey and Azerbaijan is, as you know, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline.
But the middle corridor is also
yes,
on the
middle
agenda.
corridor, and TANAP, the Trans-Anatolian pipeline that feeds into Trans-Adriatic pipeline in Europe later on. So that can be extended to include a green energy or electrification corridor from Central Asia over the Trans-Caspian route onto Azerbaijan and to Turkey, either via Georgia or in the case of implementing the Zangezur corridor, or the widely known as the Trump Trade and Investment Corridor, between a shorter cut through Nakhchivan territory and into Turkey. That's another possibility. I mean, the UAE is a bit of an outlier in terms of our countries, maybe because it's physically kind of disconnected from this region, but they are very active as being let's say the drivers of this security, trade corridors, and also resource investment into critical minerals, into precious metals. You see that in Africa, for instance. They invest, for instance, Dubai ports or the Abu Dhabi port group. They invest into critical central nodes that have access to port connections on the ocean, which Azerbaijan provides via Baku, and it has a major coastline on the Caspian Sea. So that's a possibility. I think, if not already, there is going to be an interest because Abu Dhabi Ports Authority, I think, are interested or have invested into Kazakhstan. So the same may go in here. They are interested in Turkey. They have invested already in Istanbul. DP World is there. Abu Dhabi Ports is also interested. So that link, UAE can bring in the expertise and the connectivity vision and the capital to realize that vision of a green energy transition corridor.
Well, that's indeed very interesting, especially because geopolitics, it's a company that's present in each region.
Yeah.
Every superpower has its own interest to be promoted, sustained, its own blocs, and etc. So geopolitics, after COP29, the event which took place in Baku last year, How do you think, what should be the next strategic priority for the region to move climate commitments into measurable implementations?
So measurable implementation is the right phrase, exactly, as you said, because once commitment is made, as we saw in previous COPs, then the next step is to see them through the implementation and to measure the outcomes based on their impact on the community itself. So, which is kind of a bit of a difficult part of making that move, because commitment is the easy part, as we saw in COP28, then 29, but this year come to COP30 in Belém. The excitement has kind of faded away due to disinterest from the US and China, the two big players. And the agenda being driven by other more pressing priorities around the world in terms of both energy security and geopolitical zones of influence. So when it comes to implementation, the advantage of our region here in the Caucasus is that there is relative calm and peace now compared to what it was before 5-10 years ago, as opposed to, say, Eastern Europe or Eastern Mediterranean. So this region has this added advantage of more geopolitical stability, or the direction that it's heading towards is as such. So interconnectivity, as we mentioned, so overland routes, grid interconnectivity, even creating a common regional market of the kind that the European Union has or African countries have in like ECOWAS or the Balkan countries, among the Caucasian countries, to create a common vision and an identity around an emerging Caucasian partnership between Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and perhaps later on Armenia. So if that can take off the ground in terms of both electrification, connectivity to clean energy initiatives other than solar and wind, that includes nuclear, biofuels, but also local production, because a lot of the material parts and input, like critical minerals, are imported from major hubs around the world like China, South America, and etc. If we can manage to localize that, mining, the whole supply chain of critical rare earths, that will go into turbine production, solar photovoltaic panels, electric grids. It will go a long way, because that's the future. Rare earths are the oil of the future. So if we can form even how the European Union has started through a coal trade between Germany and France. So if we can do that based on rare earths in our region, here you go. That's the start of a new Caucasian, trade partnership. If we may not even call it data union, but a trade partnership of the sorts that we will realize more local benefits that will go into our measurable goals, like how much carbon capture we have measured, how much decarbonization of electric generation we have achieved, how much household waste we have reduced, how much methane gas leakage we have reduced, etc., etc. So that will then tie into a common framework, an index around which we can co-share our annual progress that way.
Absolutely. So very nice analysis you provided for our viewers and for me as well. Thank you so much for joining IDDTalks. We wish you good luck at this very important conference. Hopefully it will bring also more practical results. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.